thumbnails. I just take screenshots of the video. I love great thumbnails. I'm just not one of those people. Anyway, hi everyone. Thanks for joining me. I didn't want to get too far down the lane away from the books that I've read before I talked about them. So I have some updates. Okay, I have notes, and here we go. I think I talked the last time about the fact that I was rereading Alyssa Gabbert's essay collection called Any Person is the Only Self. I loved this collection. I read it as an ebook, as an e-arc, and I liked it, but I wasn't really absorbing it as fast, as well as I really wanted to, because I don't know, it wasn't in the physical form, and especially a collection of essays. I like to see the writing on the page, turn the page, have the chapter breaks, and take notes. So I did that this time. It's really a collection based around or based off of a lot of different books, and how different books that Alyssa has read feed into whatever subject the essay is about. And so there's a lot of quoting from books. If you don't like that, you will not like this book. And some of, like, she'll use a book like Frankenstein, and she calls Frankenstein the time, the way time is used in Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, as weird time. And then she uses that as a springboard and then brings back in different references to the story Frankenstein, which is one of my all-time favorite books. So I was hooked from the beginning. What I loved that she said about Frankenstein is, she put it so well, is that we are in nested narratives. You are in so many different perspectives. That's why, in my mind, one of the reasons it's a genius book. And sometimes you're in first person, sometimes you're in third person, and it goes back and forth. And it goes back and forth in time. She calls it simultaneity in fiction, which I love. Time is going fast, then it's slow, it's rich, it's frantic. Oh, and then she talks about the three main characters in the book. Victor Frankenstein, the monster, and then who's the third person? How they all are searching for companionship. She brings in Rilke, one of my favorite poets. I'll be talking about poetry in a second. She mentions the book Red Comet, which I began reading out of the library when it was first published. It might have even been 2020, maybe 2021. And I know that I will come back to that book someday. I'll have to buy it used because it's so large and I want to take my time with it. But it was excellent, the part that I read. Just excellent research done by that author. There's an essay in there talking about journals and how somebody shows up, famous writers usually show up differently in their journals because most of them, they're assuming they're going to be read. I can say that that is true of the journals of Patricia Highsmith, which I've read. And she's particularly talking about Susan Sontag and Virginia Woolf, and how their voice and how their writing changes over time. And she gives you a couple entries, like the year of Virginia Woolf's death leading up to her death. And then she shares the last entry Virginia Woolf made in her journal. Oh, it's so touching. It's excellent, excellent stuff. I'm not doing this book nearly enough justice. I absolutely love it. Alyssa Gabbert's Any Person is the Only Self. I highly recommend. Okay, I want to talk about poetry, something I've never talked about on this channel. I don't read poetry as a regular practice. I don't pick up poetry books out of the library as a regular practice. I own a couple. I own two, actually. And but there's a couple poets that I've adored for a long time that I'll talk about here, and then one newer one to me that I wanted to share. So Rilke is a poet that I've been reading for a long time. I have a couple of his favorite poems, which I don't remember the names of, but I will list them here, maybe two or three of my absolute favorite ones that really mean something to me. They grab me every time I read them or I hear them read. And then Mary Oliver has been an absolute favorite poet of mine for a very long time. I listened to her interview, which was done quite a while ago by Krista Tippett on the podcast On Being. It used to be called On Faith, I think, but it's been called On Being for a long time. And I've listened to that interview with Mary Oliver many times. Mary Oliver reads her poems in that interview. I'll link the On Being podcast website below so you can find it. But I was given this book. My husband found this book somewhere. I think he might have given it to me for my birthday. It's a library book that was, I don't know, what do they call it when they take books out of circulation? I can't remember. This is from the Frost Free Library, Charlesboro, New Hampshire. Oh, that sounds fantastic, that area. This is an interesting Mary Oliver book because it's kind of like Mary Oliver writing some things, like essays, and some poems. Yeah, it's so interesting. This was published in 1999, and it's called Winter Hours, Prose Poems, and Poems. So it's a smattering of Mary Oliver writing to you in first person, and some of her poems based around winter. She says, it says in here, Poe, Frost, Hopkins, and Whitman were subjects of interest in classes I recently taught at Bennington College in Vermont, where I now live part of each year. Ah! So I love this book. I wanted to raise it up because it's an unusual one. It is not just a collection of poems. It is Mary Oliver writing to us about not just about her famous poems, but just writing about her life in wintertime, where she lives, how she's come up with some of the nature poems that she's written, but in little snippets that are so digestible and fun to read. And then there is a part in here about the four poets that I just mentioned. This makes a wonderful gift book for someone that loves Mary Oliver, or a gift to yourself. I just adore this book. And then another one that I found on my bookcase like a year ago that I forgot I even had, because again, I don't buy a lot of poetry books, is this gem of a book called Emily Dickinson Envelope Poems, put out by New Directions. And I could recall that I had this book. It was something I bought when we were up at the lake house. My husband, well before I knew him, bought this little lake house in the Hudson Valley on a lake when he was working in New York City and living in Hoboken, New Jersey, in an apartment. This was the first house he ever bought in like 1995, 96 or something. And he's owned it ever since. It's been an Airbnb for decades now. And we go up sometimes and enjoy all kinds of things in the Hudson Valley and in Western Massachusetts. And we went into Hudson a lot. And there is one of my favorite bookstores there called the Spotted Dog. And it's a little perfectly curated bookstore and a bar. And it's the coziest place you'd ever want to be in the wintertime. And we must have been up there around New Year's, because I just found this today. I looked on the last page and it says Bought at Hudson Bookstore, December 28th, 2017. I never write in books. It's crazy. Anyway, the premise of this book is to show you actual envelopes that Emily Dickinson wrote little poems on, the flaps, wherever. This was a little thing that she did. And because it's very hard to read, and so they reproduce, you can't see it here in this video, but they reproduce the poem typed out so you can read it. But it's the writing is very small, even in the reproduced thing. In this short life that only lasts an hour, how much or little now is within our power? Just these little snippets of things. And I was reminded that also in this book, there is a picture of a little pencil that she must have mailed to one of her friends to say, could you write me someday? Oh yeah, here it is. It's this little pencil. I highly recommend also this as a gift. It's a New Directions book, Emily Dickinson, envelope poems. It's so unique and very approachable, Emily Dickinson's poems. But the new poetry book that I discovered through listening to an interview with the poet writer Megan Fernandez, and she has a book of prose poems and poems out called I Do Everything I'm Told. And she also has another one that she put out not too long ago called Pretty Boys. And I've gotten I Do Everything I'm Told out of the library, but I've returned it already. And I don't know, it's so approachable to me. I really connect with Megan Fernandez, her writing. I can't recommend this enough. I'll put a thumbnail of what the cover looks like. I Do Everything I'm Told. I mean, she does some really brilliant things here. She's got some little like prose poems that just read like little snippets of experiences. And then she's got these, I think she calls them the crown sonnets or something, where she's written these sonnet poems when she was in different cities. She travels a lot. She's like she just travels a lot to many different cities. And so it's the Paris sonnet and the Lisbon sonnet and the Tulsa sonnet. I don't know. And what's really interesting is the last little phrase of the sonnet is the first phrase of this as the start of the sonnet, the next sonnet. And because that last phrase is set in a different tone, in a different setting, in a different time, and then it flows into the rest of that sonnet, it's completely different. The use of that thing is completely, I think it's genius. I can't recommend it enough. Okay, I think I'm just going to show you a couple things that I've just gotten out of the library, a couple holds that I'm really excited about, and then I'll tell you what I've been reading. I found this book. This was not a hold. I found this book called The Book of Mothers, How Literature Can Help Reinvent Modern Motherhood by Carrie Mullins. Let's see, Carrie Mullins. She's a journalist and essayist whose work has appeared in Parents, Food and Wine, Epicurious, Tin House, and so on. She lives in New York City with her husband and son. What I really liked about the premise of this book is she breaks her essays down into different books and authors. So she calls the first one The Real Housewife of Longbourn, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Material Girls is the second chapter, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. The Cool Girl Has Kids, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The Myth of Zero Risk, Passing by Nella Larson. Don't they sound fascinating? I think this is the kind of book I like to read a nonfiction in the morning as part of my morning routine before I get going, and this will be that book. I don't think I'm going to read it end to end, but I'll just dip in and read some of it. So that looked super interesting. And then a book that I've been looking forward to that really captivated me when I saw it advertised somewhere is The Hypocrite by Jo Hamya. Let's see. Jo Hamya is the author of 3 Rooms and has written for the New York Times. This is like a story within a story. This is a young woman. This is an older man. And I'll just paraphrase, but it says, from a fiercely talented writer poised to be a new generation's Rachel Cusk or Deborah Levy. A novel set between the London stage and Sicily about a daughter who turns her novelist father's fall from grace into a play, and a father who increasingly fears his precocious daughter's voice. So his daughter's written a play, and the father has seen the show. He doesn't know that the daughter has written this play about a vacation that she and the father took a couple years ago when either something was revealed, something happened. It says fall from grace. I don't know. I didn't read the rest of the blurb. That's all I needed to know. I'm going to try it. This one, again, I saw it somewhere. I'm so happy to have it. It's a new one. It's called The Last Sane Woman by Hannah Regal. It's a debut novel. Hannah Regal was born in Nottingham and now lives in London. From 2012 to 2019, she was co-editor of the feminist art journal Salt. And she has had 2 collections of poetry. A beguiling novel, debut novel about friendship and failure. I don't know why this speaks to me, but Nicola Long is a few years out of a fine arts degree, listless and unenthusiastically employed in London. That already has me interested for some reason. She begins to spend her hours at a small, underfunded archive dedicated to women's art. There, she discovers one side of a correspondence beginning in 1976 and spanning a dozen years, written for one woman, a ceramics graduate, uncannily named Nicola, to a friend living a contrasting and conventionally moored life. She becomes obsessed with this. That's all I need to know. That is all I need to know. So I will let you know how I get along with that. Or if you never hear from me again about it, then you know I didn't. That's kind of how it goes. And then the last one is called The Most by Jessica Anthony. Jessica Anthony is an author who wrote a book in 2020 called Enter the Aardvark. It was a satire. It was a satire about this taxidermied aardvark that was arrived as a gift to was it a Republican new politician, a newly elected young guy, or was he like an aide? I can't remember, but something like that. And crazy zany plot ensues. Who sent the aardvark? Even the taxidermist is somehow involved in the story, but I don't remember the story. I just remember that you either bought into the premise or you didn't buy into the premise, and I did, and I thought it was entertaining. This also has a premise. This is about a wife and mother in the 1950s in Delaware who, like on a Sunday when her family goes off to do something, goes to the apartment pool and decides not to get out. And it's a story for the next 8 hours or something. I don't know, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Okay. What I'm reading now. I'm reading 2 things. I'm still reading To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I am reading this so slowly. I'm taking it all in. You have to read it slowly. It's so rich. It's a summer vacation at a place on the coast with a lighthouse. It's the Ramsey family. It's Lily and some guy, and it's delightful and rich and just an astounding book. I read some of the introduction by Eudora Welty. It's so good. Now that I'm like halfway through, I feel safe to read the introduction because it just gives you more insight and you can appreciate what Virginia Woolf is doing here. I continue to feel like it's Mrs. Dalloway, except ramped up into internal experience and external goings on right in front of you. But she's doing this with many characters. Mr. Ramsey, Mrs. Ramsey, some of the kids, Lily, the young girl who may or may not marry Mr. Briscoe or whatever his name is. It's so good. I know everybody says this about this, but I really feel like I have benefited from reading the first Virginia Woolf book. Can't remember the name. And Mrs. Dalloway. I feel like that has set me up for this book because I keep comparing and contrasting. What do I have marked here with this little cat sticker? The interior of its characters' lives is where we experience everything. And in the subjective, contrary to what so many authors find there, lies its clarity. There is nowhere in this radiant novel a shadow of detachment. Such is Virginia Woolf's genius. She's able to do both. She's able to pull in the aperture and just sink inside and give you the interior of even somebody that is closed down, like Mr. Ramsey, because he's a man in this time period and doesn't express himself fully, but we get his full interior experience through Virginia Woolf's writing. And then she opens up the aperture so that you get the full expanse of what's happening outside, but in little snippets here and there. It doesn't ramble on in exterior landscape scenes. It does not do that. I just am having such a wonderful time with this. And I actually, so in my video, I think at the beginning of the year, I might have said, I can't recall, that I wanted to try to read W. Somerset Maugham because I had read him when I was in my 20s, and I read Of Human Bondage, and I was changed. It's one of the first early pieces of, in my reading life, of literature I had read. And I had picked this one up at a library sale. This is amazing, just based on the way it starts. I have no idea what the book is actually going to be like, but like it fools you because it's W. Somerset Maugham, isn't it? Yeah, it's W. Somerset Maugham starting off. You think it's like the foreword of the thing. It says, I have never begun a novel with more misgiving. If I call it a novel, it's only because I don't know what else to call it. I have little story to tell, and I end neither with a death nor a marriage. Blah, and it goes on. Many years ago, I wrote a novel called The Moon and Sixpence. In that, I took a famous painter, Paul Gauguin, and using the novelist's privilege, devised a number of incidents to illustrate the character I had created. In the present book, I have attempted to do nothing of the kind. I have invented nothing. To save embarrassment to people still living, I've given to the person who plays a part in the story names of my own contriving, and so on and so on. Is that true? Is this story real life? I don't know. I don't know. It says Somerset Maugham's greatest and most enduringly popular novel tells the story of Larry Darrell, an attractive and enigmatic American who forsakes the comforts of his bourgeois society to live a life dedicated to the pursuit of truth and meaning. Larry's former fiancée is the beautiful and vivacious Isabel Maturin, who is struggling to maintain a family nearly destroyed by the Depression. I don't know. The Razor's Edge. I'm just like 24 pages into this book. Don't tell me anything about it. I don't know where it goes. I don't know if I'm going to continue to be interested in it because I just keep reading this when I'm reading. So I will get back to this. I might end up taking this on my trip. This might be a good one to take. So we'll see. More on trip reading later. We're taking a trip to Colorado. We usually go in September for a week. We will be staying near Pikes Peak, which is different for us because we're usually staying near like Boulder and El Dorado Canyon, Boulder Canyon, places like that. But we're staying near Pikes Peak. We do a lot of hiking and climbing. It's the end of summer. kind of, on the calendar anyway. School is back. Please let me know what you're up to and any of your thoughts about anything I've mentioned here. But let me know what you're getting into reading wise and otherwise. And thanks for being here. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.